All right, I think it's time. Let's kick this thing off. So, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world watching this. This is the release webinar for HappyFire 5.6.0, as well as Smile CDR 2021.11. We have codenamed this release the Raccoon release. So this is our launch webinar for the Raccoon release. As anyone who has watched us before will know, we do these releases quarterly. So we do a release in February, a release in May, a release in August, and a release in November. We will be back again next February with our next release. And what we'll be covering today is everything we've been working on over the last 3 months. So without further ado, let's kick that off. We will, of course, be talking about what's new in the product as of the last 3 months, as well as a little peek into what we're working on over the next quarter. And as we've done for the last few sessions like this, we will be finishing off today with a Q&A session. So stay tuned for that. So let's start off by talking about Raccoon. This is kind of a special release for us. I say that because this is, of course, our 18th named release. We decided several years ago that we would start the alphabetical naming thing for code names of releases that is fairly popular, at least in the open source world, and sometimes outside that world as well. We choose a word more or less randomly. The team gets to vote on how we name each of our releases. But even when we started this, we always knew that R was going to be Raccoon, because of course R is Raccoon rather is the HappyFire mascot. We've been asked many times over the years, why Raccoon? I've always tried to think of a joke of HappyFire, I don't know, living in your backyard, knocking your garbage over, and I've never quite been able to make that joke come together. So I don't have a funny explanation for it, but let's give you the real story here once and for all. We, the HappyFire team and the Smile CDR team, of course, our home base is in Toronto, Canada. Certainly not nearly all of us are based here in Toronto, but that's where I'm speaking from today, and that's where a bunch of our people are. Toronto is often known as the raccoon capital of the world. We don't have any metrics to back that up, but I will tell you, this city has a love-hate relationship with our furry friends. And just look at these pictures on the screen. I mean, how can you not love raccoons? They are adorable, even if they knock over garbage bins and make a giant mess. I know personally I've had to clean up all kinds of disasters caused by raccoons over the years, but they're so lovable. How could you not love a raccoon? A little bit of interesting stuff about raccoons. There's really some interesting stuff. The word raccoon actually comes from an indigenous word, which means one who scratches with their hands, oddly enough. So it's that's where the name comes from. And I think probably the most interesting thing that I only just learned myself is the famous mask on a raccoon's face. It actually is not just for their good looks. The reason it's there. If you've ever seen an athlete that has they put little dark spots under their eyes to avoid sun glare. The raccoon's mask has that exact same effect, so it helps them to see better in situations with glare. And anyone who lives in a place with raccoons has probably been driving and suddenly realized their headlights were pointed straight at a raccoon, so you can kind of appreciate why they would need protection from glare. It's a pretty common thing. There we go. One other thing I'll say, I dug up on Wikipedia a map showing the habitat of raccoons. They are all over the place in North America. They cover all of North America and Central America. Not all of it, actually, not the far north, but a fair bit of North America. There's also some interesting invasive and introduced populations of raccoons. I had no idea. There's one in Europe, and oddly enough, in Japan. I'm sure there's an interesting story there. I don't know what it is, but there we go. Raccoons are present in other parts of the world as well. That's awesome. A couple of interesting things that have happened to Smile, the organization, over the last quarter. One, we were the first organization to be Drummond certified for payer and patient access FHIR API. We're very happy with that. We know we're not won't be the last one certified on that. There is an awesome community of amazing vendors out there doing that certification, and we love working with all of them. And we love the burgeoning FHIR ecosystem of patient access APIs that's coming up and enabling the world to get better connected. But we were the first, and we're proud of that. We've also implemented a customer feedback system. So for Smile customers, we're taking great strides to be more responsive to customer feedback. So our new customer feedback system is one great step in that direction. On the HappyFire side of the world, I'd like to take this moment to announce that we have always tried once a year to run a community survey. We didn't do it last year. There was a couple of big world events got in the way last year. Don't know if anyone noticed, but we had COVID, so there we go. We are getting back to that. So we're launching a HappyFire community survey. I would like to encourage anyone who is a user or potential user or has opinions on HappyFire to take a few moments to fill out the survey. It's really short. It's got 2 pages, and the second page is optional, so it really isn't going to take you a long time to answer it. I will say, particularly, we are considering increasing the minimum JDK requirement required in order to use HappyFire. Currently, we support Java 8 and above. We are considering raising that floor potentially to Java 11 or maybe even beyond that. If you've got an opinion, either good or bad, on that change, please do take a moment to fill out the survey and express that opinion. We do have a question about that, and the answers to that survey will determine whether we proceed with that change or not, and how quickly we proceed with that change. So it is important that we get some feedback on how people feel about that potential change. One other bit of, perhaps I'll call it housekeeping, that is important to get right off the bat. We have addressed in this release a critical fix for users of the Postgres database. Postgres, unfortunately, with our use of Hibernate, we have been bitten by a bug that's actually in the Hibernate library that we use as an ORM mapping within HappyFire, and by extension of that within Smile CDR. That issue means that anyone who uses the vacuum LO maintenance command can potentially lose a couple of specific bits of data from their database. It does not involve losing the contents of FHIR resources or the indexing of those FHIR resources. That is not at risk. But there are a handful of things, most notably the notes field on users in Smile CDR, as well as the side-loaded terminology contents are potentially at risk of data loss due to this issue. That issue has been fixed, so we do recommend anyone using Postgres upgrade as soon as they can. It's also worth mentioning this bug will not be triggered unless you do explicitly run the vacuum LO command. So as long as you're not running that, and clearly many people haven't, this bug has existed since the beginning of HappyFire 9 years ago. It has always existed in Hibernate, and we didn't even realize it was there because it's not that common for people to manually run that command. But there we have it. Do upgrade if that does affect you. And of course, this does only affect users of Postgres. If you're on any other database platform, you are not affected by this issue. One other thing I'll mention for HappyFire users, we recently finally upgraded the infrastructure that powers happy.fire.org. We've had a number of complaints about the reliability of happy.fire.org over the last few months. We know it has gone down for days at a time recently, which is awful. It is a victim of its own success, frankly. There's a longer technical explanation I won't get into here, although it's kind of interesting. Basically, the net result is we've had so much traffic on it, that traffic has knocked it down a few times. So we have increased the infrastructure, and it has been rock solid ever since we did that. And hopefully that is going to be the case. We know that happy.fire.org is used by users all over the world, 24/7 for all kinds of awesome purposes, and we want to keep providing that service. So I'm happy that's up. And I will take a moment to thank our friends over at the Google Cloud Platform who have generously provided some hosting space for a bunch of the fire.org infrastructure, including happy.fire.org. We are very appreciative of that, and especially the fact that they've given us even more infrastructure to keep this site up and running reliably, which is awesome. So getting on to new features in this release, we have made a bunch of changes to the everything operation. The $everything operation, of course, can be used to pull down a complete copy of everything associated with a patient or a group of patients or a list of patients. There's all kinds of good stuff there. We have implemented support for the everything operation across the FHIR gateway, as well as support for it within MongoDB backend, the MongoDB storage module, as well as support for $everything backed by the MDM, the HappyFire MDM modules. There's some really neat sort of possibilities there. And this that last one I think is neat just because it speaks to the power of an integrated MDM solution within a broader FHIR repository. This is one of the great advantages of having those two sort of concepts married together is it allows for all kinds of interesting intersections, and MDM backing the everything operation is just such an interesting application of that exact concept. You'll also notice we've added a new syntax that allows for querying everything for multiple patients, which is increasingly common these days as people sort of have all kinds of complicated info structures developed. We have put a bunch of work into our CDA Exchange module over the last while. CDA Exchange is effectively a mechanism for ingesting CDA documents, for exporting data into FHIR data into CDA documents. In fact, for exporting FHIR data into generated and templated FHIR documents, and then converting those FHIR documents into CDA documents. We've put a whole bunch of interesting enhancements into that to better and more completely support the CCD specifications and the various document types that are specified within. So very exciting stuff for users of CDA. On the MongoDB front, we have put a bunch of work into that. As I just mentioned, we now support $everything on Mongo. We also support quantity searches, that meaning the type of search I've got on the screen right now. So I'm looking for observations, for example, where the value is at or above or below or anything like that, a specific threshold. We have also fixed a couple of issues that prevented successful ingestion of Cynthia data. So Cynthia data can now be ingested into Mongo as well, which is awesome. On our terminology service, we are finding increasingly people are doing really interesting things with terminology, and certainly we continue to improve the native terminology services that exist within both HappyFire and Smile CDR. We now support versioning of value sets. If you don't know what that means, effectively what this means, you could sort of picture if I've got versioned code systems, which we already supported, meaning that I can load in multiple versions of the same code system and use them in parallel. It's now possible to create versioned value sets as well, where you expand a value set against a specific version of a code system, and perhaps you create a new version of that same value set, but you want to keep both versions and in some cases use, validate codes against, expand, any of the other operations, a specific version of that value set without having to replace the previous version. That is all now possible. If that didn't make sense to you, we do have a bunch of documentation on how that works, and I don't want to dwell on it too much, but it is a really neat feature for people who are working on value sets in any kind of serious, big scale kind of way. Also worth mentioning, we have supported for a long time now a feature called value set pre-expansion, which is a feature that pre-calculates the expansion of value sets and allows for really fast validation against them, paging around them, effectively makes even really massive value sets quite manageable and quite performant to deal with. One of the confusing things about pre-expanded value sets is you didn't always know when the pre-expansion happened, meaning that if codes had changed over time, you might be looking at a value set expansion that didn't reflect the current state of a code system. We have greatly improved the response messages you get when you use any kind of operation that takes advantage of pre-expanded value sets. So that'll all appear in the responses now. We've also implemented a number of new operations, specifically the code system validate code, as well as the subsumes operation are both implemented. And as a part of our work on pre-expansion status, we've now got a new operation called invalidate expansion, which effectively invalidates the pre-expanded value set and causes the system to pre-expand it. This is confusing to talk about, but that's what that does. One other thing we've done in terms of terminology, we are also seeing increasingly people relying on other terminology services than the native HappyFire one, as well as people coming up with complicated architectures where they have HappyFire's terminology server living on separate server infrastructure from perhaps clinical data storage. We're big fans of that architecture. This is one of the amazing things about FHIR is it allows you to build up sort of neat, integrated, and complicated meshes of information without it actually being all that complicated. And the idea of having a FHIR server calling out for its terminology operations to another terminology capable FHIR server is a great one. So we have added, we've done a bunch of work on making that smooth, certainly including the ability to add authentication between the FHIR server and the terminology FHIR server. And of course, this is super useful for people who are using systems like OntoServer and HealthTerm as their backing terminology service. And we're big fans of those products. So great, great feature allowing that to happen, of course. We have done a bunch of work for HL7V2 Exchange. This is an ever popular feature with people who are trying to migrate and get legacy data into a FHIR repository. We now support what's called encapsulated data in our ORU processing, which is most commonly used for things like embedding PDFs and pictures and that type of thing, any kind of binary content into observations, which is a fairly common thing to do in the real world. We do now support it. We will ingest that content. We will convert it to FHIR top order content, and it will be preserved, which is great. We've also made a couple of other changes, certainly including configuration around the way that we handle contained resources for a couple of the supporting segments in HL7V2 resources. So there we go. We've also added a bit of logging, which is always useful if you're trying to troubleshoot problems with your ingestion. As always, we have continued to focus on performance, and we are continuing to focus on performance. We are big believers in FHIR infrastructure performing as quickly as it possibly can. We have made great strides to improve the performance of our MongoDB implementation, specifically for writing data to Mongo, as well as for synchronizing data across FHIR servers. And we've actually put a fair bit of work into optimizing specifically for Cynthia data, just because we know increasingly this is a very popular workflow as someone wants to ingest a whole bunch of Cynthia data so they can try something or test an application or something. So we want that to be as quick as possible. And we've put lots of work into making that work quickly. On the MDM front, and MDM is just one of these amazing features. I can never stop talking about it. I just love how this all works. We have added a new point cut to our interceptor system, which it basically gives you a bunch more information about the golden resource that's generated by the MDM system. So if you've got workflows that you want to take advantage of that and inject your own logic into into any of your processing pipelines, you've now got access to that. We've now also added an operation, a FHIR operation that can be used to manually create links. And of course, if you're using an MDM for real, sometimes, I mean, most of the time, hopefully the MDM gets the links right on its own, but any system of any complexity like that is occasionally going to need some help from a human, and having operations to do that is how we let the humans give that help. So there we go. One other thing I will say in terms of, I guess this isn't a new feature, but it is important to mention, we have decided that we are formally deprecating the MySQL relational database for both HappyFire JPA server as well as for Smile CDR. Now, deprecating does not mean that we're dropping support for it. If you have an existing implementation with MySQL, it will continue to work. We will continue to test against it. We will continue to support it. We have no plans to remove any code for support for MySQL. This is important. But it is worth mentioning that we have found MySQL performance is an order of magnitude worse than Postgres for similar operations. And as such, we've just had so many issues over the last few years with somebody who has, seen MySQL as a supported option and taken it, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to do when we claim to support MySQL, and then discovered that they're just not getting great performance. And the fix, time after time, is switch to Postgres, which performs much better than MySQL does for the types of workflows and operations and transactions and SQL statements that come with a FHIR server and the things that you tend to do with FHIR servers. So as of Smile CDR users, at least, will now see a warning in the logs if they're using MySQL. We have no similar plans to emit a warning on HappyFire at this point, but we are recommending for both of those platforms, if you're in a position to do so, and you're looking for an open source database to back your FHIR store, we do recommend Postgres over MySQL. If you have questions about that, by the way, we would love to hear from you. HappyFire users, certainly the Google group is a great way to do that. Smile CDR users raising concerns or questions or comments to your customer success rep would be a great idea. We would love to hear from you about this if this will affect you. I'm going to take a moment to talk about an application called Appsphere, which has been added to our product portfolio. Appsphere is not itself actually new. We were talking about it previously as what we were calling app management tools. We've now given it a name, so that product is now called Appsphere. Appsphere is a number of developer tools that can be used for anyone who's trying to build up their own smart on FHIR ecosystem. So if you are an organization that is trying to build up your own APIs and an ecosystem of applications that take advantage of those FHIR APIs, Appsphere can help you manage the entire workflow of bringing apps into your environment, running them through an approval process, granting them access to data, potentially removing them at some point, interchanges between your organization and the developers of those applications. There is a great deal of sort of really useful tooling in this tool chain. I will say most commonly this tool chain is thought of as the app gallery, which is a component of Appsphere, but there is a whole lot more to it as well. So it is an entire ecosystem of tools that can be used for the management of apps within your own organization. So what's new in Appsphere since other than renaming it to Appsphere in the most recent release? We now support document uploads in the developer portal. And the developer portal, of course, is where app developers can self-register themselves so that they can potentially get listed as an application in your environment. We have improved our email notification capabilities. We've added a whole bunch of UI UX improvements across all of the tool chain. We've added some error checking to make sure that any self-registered apps have all of the right information, as well as we have started to implement the workflows that will be required specifically for peer-to-peer exchanges. So a whole bunch of work in anticipation of the role of Appsphere in supporting peer-to-peer exchanges of data, which is great. Speaking of peer-to-peer, let's talk a little bit about peer-to-peer, which is another product we're working on these days. We have begun work on a solution to support peer-to-peer data exchange. As well, anyone who is dealing with the payer market will know, certainly there is a requirement coming up for payers to be able to, as it says, initiate, share, and transfer the previous 5 years of clinical records at a member's request, which is a really neat requirement. If we had more time, I'd love to dive into all the reasons I think this is neat. It obviously affects only the US market, but as we've seen with FHIR, things that happen in the US do tend to influence what happens in the rest of the world as well. So this whole concept of peer-to-peer exchange is neat for all kinds of reasons that extend, I think, well beyond the borders of the United States, and it's great for that reason. We will, of course, be in our first implementation of the peer-to-peer data exchange, be taking advantage of the $everything operator to back this. And you will have noticed in the previous slides all of the improvements to $everything. You could probably connect the dots there. In terms of what was driving that specific set of improvements. We are taking advantage of the OIDC and OAuth2 flows to effectively register the P2P app and provide the authorization for data flows, and then effectively a backend component that allows a repository to request a data exchange from another repository. It's all actually quite a neat flow. So I think by the time this is all up and running, I mean, it's really going to be a great test of this new mesh of interoperability that's being stood up by organizations all over the place. So very cool. This is a quick diagram here that shows you the way the Appsphere, or sorry, the peer-to-peer solution actually works. And there we go. I think I will skip that. So what are we going to be working on in the next quarter? On the Smile CDR side, we are beginning work for CDA ingestion. So we have supported for a long time the ability to generate and export CDA documents from a FHIR repository. We're now beginning work on the reverse of that, the ability for you to take CDA documents, convert them to FHIR, and store them in your repository. We are beginning work, and actually the second point should probably be under both Smile and Happyfire because it affects both. Actually, the next 2 points affect both products. We are beginning work on making subscriptions partition aware. And what that means is if you've got a database that's taking advantage of Happyfire or Smile CDR's partitioning capabilities, you will have the ability to use subscriptions in a partition aware way, meaning that you can register a subscription against a specific partition and have data be triggered only for that partition, which is very useful. We're also going to put a whole lot of work in MDM data load performance. One of the complaints we've heard from people who are trying to adopt the MDM solution is that that it works really well when it's up and running, but as you're trying to initially load your data, it really slows down the initial load of your data. So we are trying to improve the right performance basically of MDM solutions. And this, we've got a bunch of great ideas that we're confident are going to work there. It's just been a matter of finding the time to implement them. So that's going to happen over the next quarter for Smile CDR and HappyFire users. One other thing I'll mention, and this also affects probably HappyFire initially, but will certainly affect Smile CDR users as well. We are doing a whole bunch of work to better take advantage of the capabilities of Elasticsearch for more generalized searching capabilities. We do, of course, support Lucene and Elasticsearch today for a couple of very specific workflows, notably terminology, value set expansions against large, complicated value sets can be done really quickly with Elasticsearch. We also use Elasticsearch to power the _text and _content search parameters that can be used for full text searching. But we've got a bunch of ideas in terms of using Elasticsearch for really performant other types of searches as well. So we're going to be doing a whole bunch of work there over the next while. On the Appsphere front, we are going to be working on provider workflows. So basically, ways of taking advantage of Appsphere that make more sense for providers, health providers, as well as adding analytics and reporting capabilities. We know that anyone who's standing up an app marketplace of their own within their own organization wants to know what are the APIs being used for, which apps are being used, that type of thing. So analytics on that, of course, is going to be a really good thing. We're also going to be adding a whole bunch of new infrastructure around partner solutions. So this idea that if you've got a great big FHIR infrastructure you've stood up in your organization, you probably want the ability to add other capabilities provided by other people than us. So we're going to try to improve the way that works. On our peer-to-peer front over the next quarter, I mean, the first thing we're going to do is complete the solution and proceed with our first live deployment of it. We're very close to that already. We are going to come up with mechanisms to indicate sensitive data so that members can exclude specific data from being copied between members, which seems like a really useful thing. We're going to take advantage of single sign-on, which of course is one of the great features of OIDC in general, to sort of streamline the experience of a member doing the peer-to-peer exchange. We're also going to convert to using bulk FHIR, the FHIR bulk access API as at least a supported transport mechanism, and probably the preferred transport mechanism over the $everything operation. We're also going to start work on prior auth, and that'll be basically work on supporting a new set of implementation guides for that specific world. One final thing, and I think this is the last slide, we're going to say that for Smile CDR customers, we would love to hear about your specific configuration. We are trying to build up a database that just helps us understand how people are using Smile, which modules they're using, and how they've got them set up and that type of thing. So we would love to ask if people are able to export their config. We would love to have you share a copy with us. The automatically exported config does exclude sensitive data. It doesn't include things like credentials, so that does get excluded. And you've got an opportunity to review it and exclude anything else you want if there's stuff you don't want to share. Certainly this isn't required, but we would love to hear from you. It does help us sort of understand how the product's getting used. So this is kind of an equivalent perhaps to the HappyFire community survey that I was plugging at the start, and I will plug once more right now. HappyFire users, please don't forget about our community survey. So that concludes the new feature discussion. And look at that, I was aiming to be done at 10:30, and it is exactly 10:30. We hit the nail exactly, which I love. So with that said, I think we are going to open up the floor to questions. I'm assuming, Jason, are you going to be leading us on that? Jason, I think is. Jason, for anyone who doesn't know, leads our product management group here at Smile CDR. So all of our awesome product managers who help set priorities and decide what we're going to be working on, all of them are a part of a great team that Jason leads. So welcome, Jason.
Fantastic. Thanks, James. And I wish that all of our meetings could keep to the same rigorous timing that you do. So we're open as always for questions, and ideally these are coming through the Zoom functionality. I will try and keep an eye on the YouTube crowd as well. So this is your chance to run anything by James, Ken, and the crew. All right, so we have one. Do you have a response to this criticism? Which I'm currently loading. Sounds
yeah, I'm gonna load it. I bet I know which criticism it is. I'm going to load it and see if it is.
Can you get to that, James? So why aren't we talking about
I
FHIR?
can, yeah. So what we're talking about, so this is a criticism that came in from Google. Why aren't we talking about FHIR at scale? So I mean, I definitely don't want to get into the specifics of it. This has been a big topic of discussion, of course, over here. I mean, we are naturally honored that I mean, it's been funny. This isn't the only one that we've seen. There's been two in the last couple of months, and we're seeing both Google and IBM seem to be taking shots at each other, and we're honored that they think that HappyFire is deserving of of being worthy of their shots as well. I think that's fun. I mean, you know, we are gonna publish a formal response to this. I will say, I mean, the FHIR community is a great and supportive community, and I mean, from the start, I think it's always been a very supportive community where people don't tend to take crazy shots at each other. And I guess, I mean, it's now reached a point where that's changing. And so fair enough. I guess we kind of have to respond when this thing comes out. Certainly, I do think there are some valid points being made here. I mean, you know, we have never really published any kind of performance numbers for either of these products. And the reason we don't do that is because every implementation is so dramatically different. I look at the numbers that IBM published, and I mean, they came up with a couple of very specific operations in terms of their reads and writes, and a configuration of HappyFire that was configured to be absolutely the most conformant to the FHIR spec that it possibly could, but also the least performant, and then demonstrated that it doesn't perform that well when in that specific scenario. I don't know. I mean, that is a thing that someone is perfectly well within their rights to publish, but I don't know that it proves much. I think that's all I'm going to say for now. We are going to come up with a formal response to this, and I think there are, you know, I do want to be clear. I think there are some very valid criticisms that are being made here, and I think they are worth responding to. So there we go. Thank you, Brendan.
Don't see another question on the Zoom, but please take advantage of this opportunity. I can say even internally, it's hard to get time with these brains. There is a comment on the YouTube. Someone is inviting you to the HL7 India Connectathon. Ooh. And how do I get in touch to provide more information?
So there we go. I mean, certainly if anyone wants to chat, James at Smile CDR, that's the easiest way to reach me, or jamesagnew@gmail.com. Those are my two email addresses. Well, this may be a short one this time around in terms of Q&A. That just means we did a good job at answering everyone's questions. Oh, there we go. One came in. Just when you try and wrap it up.
All right. So, and this always happens. You just have to pretend you're going to hang up. Can you speak to the integration of third-party terminology server for a plain server scenario in HappyFire?
Yeah, absolutely. This is great. So, I mean, this is going to get a little bit technical, but I think that kind of question demands that type of thing. So why not? If you're using a plain server, and to anyone who's not familiar with what that means, when we say plain server, we're talking about a facade. So effectively using HappyFire's modules to place a FHIR server on top of an existing data store. So that's in other words, not using HappyFire's built-in database data model, but putting HappyFire against your own data model, maybe with your own database, or against a facade against other web services or something like that. That is a very, very popular pattern. That's called being a plain server. We do absolutely support the use of third-party terminology servers there. And the way this works is even within the plain server, where this sort of gets used is it is absolutely possible to use the FHIR validator infrastructure against a plain server. And you can do that both for validating data that's coming into the system. So if your plain server supports, I don't know, create operations or update operations, that type of thing, you can configure the validator to validate that content before allowing it to proceed. You can also configure the validator to validate your responses. So if you wanted to have it validate every payload you were responding with your FHIR server, you could have it do that as well. A part of the infrastructure that powers the validation module is this thing called the validation support chain. And the validation support chain gets called by the validator every time, if the validator sees a code, like it sees a LOINC code in an observation.code, for example, it will call to the validation support chain to say, I want you to validate this code. And if you have used what's called the remote terminology server validation support module, that's a real mouthful, but if you've used that module in your validation support chain, then absolutely your validation within your plain server will take advantage of external terminology services, such as the ones provided by Onto Server. It's a great architecture. I do honestly highly recommend it. So yeah, that's a great fit, actually.
Fantastic, James. We've got another one from Camilla. Are you planning to support SAML or OAuth for single sign-on?
Oh, excellent. So I'm assuming this question is referring to Smile CDR. And I guess I'll start by saying on the HappyFire side, we don't actually include any authentication primitives there. So HappyFire, very much by design, we support authorization fully within HappyFire. We've got things like the authorization interceptor, the consent service interceptor, all of that good stuff is baked into Happy. And those are all of the primitives that you would use to sort of build up any kind of authentication and authorization infrastructure you need. But HappyFire's scope does not include the actual authentication. So it doesn't include like an OAuth 2 provider, for example, if you wanted to do smart. But if you want to build up that kind of infrastructure, absolutely you can do that. You would take advantage, I am quite certain, of the authorization interceptor to do that. But our scope for HappyFire is the FHIR server. It's not the authentication stuff. So that's kind of that I think helps to speak to where we draw the line in terms of what goes into HappyFire. That said, within Smile CDR, of course, we have a number of user-facing components, including the authentication server that's built into Smile, also including our management console, the FHIR web console that can be used to look at FHIR servers and that type of thing. We do absolutely support SAML for single sign-on for all of the user-facing components of the FHIR server today in Smile CDR. Somewhat ironically, perhaps, we don't actually support OAuth or OIDC for sign-in to the management parts, so the admin console. We haven't implemented that only because nobody has needed it yet, which I think is ironic because OIDC, of course, is a much bigger part of the FHIR community than SAML is. But just the types of deployments that we tend to do in large enterprises that use these technologies seem to mean that it makes more sense to use OIDC for things like patient access APIs, but SAML for the internal enterprise APIs. So that's the direction we've gone. So yes, we do support SAML today. We have no objection to supporting OAuth for those management tools as well. We just nobody's asked yet. So I'm sure one of these days someone will ask and we will implement. And that's that.
Perfect. We've got another one on Zoom. How does partitioning work with the bulk export?
Oh, there's a fun one. Ken, do you want to talk about that at all?
I'm just trying to remember if that one is partitioned or not. I'd have to check.
Okay.
I don't remember offhand, sorry.
Oh, that's quite all right. For what it's worth, I am almost certain it's not supported. I believe the answer to this question, and if I'm wrong about this, it just means we're better than I think. And I think I suspect this is a thing we're going to change. But I am pretty sure exports today do not sort of look at partitions, which means that if you are exporting data on a partitioned server, you will export all of the data across all partitions that matches whatever your export criteria is. So, I mean, typically you're exporting for an individual patient or something like that. If that's what you're doing, chances are all of that data is within a single partition anyway, so it doesn't matter. But if you are doing more complex exports and your data does cross partition boundaries, export is not going to look at those partition boundaries, and that has both privacy, security, and performance implications. This doesn't mean that this is the way we want this to be forever. When we launched the partitioning feature, we did mention that there are a number of things that were not trivial to make partition aware, so we didn't support them initially. An example of that today is search parameters. Search parameters are not partition aware, which means that any search parameters in your system will apply to all all partitions. Up until this release, subscriptions were in that category as well. Or sorry, up until the next release, subscriptions were in that category as well. But we've had a number of requests for subscriptions to work in a partitioned world. So that's something we're going to prioritize working on addressing. if we end up finding that there's a lot of demand for partition-aware bulk export, I could see that bubbling its way up the priority as well in terms of things we should make partition-aware. There is documentation both on Smile CDR and HappyFire, incidentally, that outlines what things are partitioned-aware. I'm not 100% sure that bulk export is in that list of things that are not yet there, but I'm pretty sure it is.
Thanks, James. We've got a few on YouTube, none left in the Zoom queue. So first, we've got a question: is AppCDR open source? And I've got to assume that we're talking about Appsphere here.
Right. Yeah, Appsphere today is not open sourced. We do, the way that we've sort of always approached everything. I mean, we are a company that fundamentally believes in the power of open source. That doesn't mean that everything we do is open sourced by any means, but we do strongly believe in it. We have absolutely developed features that we have decided, later on that they made sense to be a part of our open source contribution to the world. I will say Appsphere is not yet at that stage. Doesn't mean it never will be, but it is not today.
And we've got another from Zoom. Are there bulk import tools for HAPI or plans for such?
Oh, I love this. So I feel like a bulk import, I feel like an awful broken record. And it's mostly because every single webinar I say we're really close to having bulk import complete. And hopefully next release, and then next release comes and we still haven't done that one. So we still don't have bulk import implemented in HAPI. It certainly is. It's not like it's implemented in Smile either. We just plain have not implemented bulk import completely yet. All of the foundational pieces are there. We do know that the first thing we needed was an actual batch processor that was able to ingest large pieces of data, and we did implement that batch processor in the previous release. We just haven't implemented an external API surface that allows someone to take advantage of it to implement the actual $ bulk import operation. So hasn't happened yet. If I could look into my crystal ball a little bit, I feel like it's inevitable we're going to need to support the $ bulk import operation as a part of our broader support for the peer-to-peer data exchange, which is good news, I think, for everyone, certainly including people in the payer space, but also people in any part of the world, in any space, that are using the HappyFire open source product, because if we need to implement it for bulk import, we will absolutely implement that as open source as a part of the HappyFire stack. So it seems likely that's going to get prioritized pretty quickly.
Thanks, James. We've got another in the Zoom. Are there plans to make access to partitions more granular? So for example, today it's no access, all access, or one person access, but it would be cool to allow selective access across partitions.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. Honestly, I feel like the partitioning system, this is going to be a really weak answer, and I'm sorry in advance for that, but I mean, the partitioning system it's such a cool thing. I mean, we implemented it initially with this idea that one thing you could do with it was multi-tenancy. So if you had a traditional multi-tenant architecture, we wanted to support that for partitioning, but we did build up partitioning to be incredibly generic, just because we were sort of anticipating that people were going to come up with uses that we would never have anticipated for it. A part of that is why we've got, every partition has both every record has both a partition identity and a partition date, which allows for some really neat things to do when your partitioning is not for security, it's for other purposes like logical sharding of data or dropping old data off the bottom in really fast database operations, that type of thing. So we did a bunch of work there. We are continuing to sort of figure out exactly how we should evolve partitions. I do know, for example, and I think this is perhaps what Brendan's question is getting at. I've heard people talking about coming up with architectures where they want to group patients together and have these dynamic groups of patients that have really efficient queries that can sort of take advantage of those. And we're doing some work with one customer in terms of finding a way to do that really well at scale. And perhaps partitioning is a part of the architecture there. Honestly, I don't even know. I mean, I think maybe the best answer, and as I said at the start, I'm sorry for the weak answer, but maybe the best answer here is I would love to have a conversation about how, what that would look like, because I think there's a lot of ways that could look, and I think it would be really, really fun to discuss how partitioning could better support the things that you've got in mind. Right, and I think Brendan is. Go ahead, please.
Oh, I just want to say I did look it up, and you were right. Bulk export does not currently support partitions.
Right. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so Brendan posted a follow-up. If multi-tenancy is the intent, it sort of makes sense that there are multiple mini FHIR servers in one Smile instance. So cross mini FHIR server exchange is sort of logical. And yes, absolutely. It is worth mentioning, we do support that today, the actual exchange. It is an optional configurable parameter, but if you have got a partitioned server, you are allowed to enable references of resources across partitions, which I think is kind of the idea there. If you're thinking of your partitions as individual logical mini FHIR servers inside and having references between them, totally doable. I guess the only thing then is that when you do that, we do have some ability for you to do security against it. You know, it is with our authorization interceptor, for example, you can declare that the current user has access to these two partitions, but there are gaps there once you get into those reaches across. Things like allowing chained searches become complex, and I don't know, there are security implications, for example, to allow search chaining on a server that has partitions where the partitions where resource references reach across partitions. It's a really complicated problem space, a fun one to think about, but a complicated one nonetheless.
Thanks, James. We've got another juicy one here. Have we seen the white paper from Alyssa Knight playing and securing FHIR API implementation? Do we know if Smile CDR or HAPI was one of the tested systems?
Oh, interesting. I have to be honest, I have not seen that white paper. I mean, I can assure you I'm going to Google it as soon as we're done here and go find out what it says. Yeah, perhaps, I guess I'll say the answer to this is no, unless anyone on here does know the answer to this. But I suspect we will go and look, and perhaps we can give you an answer next time.
All right, we've got a few. I've got to catch up on the YouTube side of things here.
Okay.
So there's a question from Kuchi Ravi. When can we get CQL integrated for decision support? We know it supports measure report, but we're looking for CQL support for resources like plan definition, library, and activity definition.
Interesting. Thank you, Ravi, for that, by the way. I don't know, anybody want to take a crack at the specific timing? I will say conceptually, of course, we really want to do this. We are big believers in CQL. I think CQL is just an untapped gold mine and a transformative technology that you know, it really allows people to take better advantage of the investments they make in sort of FHIR adoption in their organization. We do have really good support for CQL you know, execution today, and a lot of that is provided by the awesome tool chains provided by our friends at Alphora. But that support in HappyFire doesn't sort of extend to every single one of the CDS operations yet. There is more development yet to be done, and I guess the question here is, when are you going to get to the next round of that development? So with that, I mean, perhaps this is a good question to turn back at you, Jason. Do you have any thoughts there?
Really well, we don't have
Jason on the spot there.
Our plans for CQL are not very firm yet, but we do have tight partnerships with the experts over there that we're working through planning.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, maybe the right answer there. Sorry for putting you on the spot, Jason. Maybe the right answer is the best thing to do is to you know, if this is important to you, make sure that that Smile is aware and get a request in, because of course we do spend a lot of time talking about what customers are asking for and using that to inform where we're going to focus.
Yeah, that's a good point, James, and that goes across the board. So we've had a few of these answers that have this element of, well, if we knew about this, then we would have information for prioritization. So for now, you reach out to the team through the support channels. We are also working on a portal where we can collect ideas and have our client base vote across ideas and build up our roadmap inputs that way. So that's a good across the board message to reinforce. We've got a question here. Can you move a HappyFire server to Smile eventually?
Yes, that is absolutely possible. That is a thing we've certainly helped people do before. It is worth mentioning, Smile CDR at its core does use the HappyFire library. In unaltered form, it's not like we have a fork or a different branch or anything like that of HappyFire that goes in there. This is important for lots of reasons. It does make it easy to move between the two platforms. I think it's also important for the HappyFire community to be aware. It's not like we're maintaining secret features or anything like that. We certainly are not. Everything that we put into the product goes into our open source, into the core engine. So yes, it is absolutely possible to move. People do that occasionally for lots of reasons. Sometimes they just want a managed product instead of an open source library. That happens sometimes, but often people just they've got a great investment in their repository and they want to start taking advantage of the other capabilities, the data exchange capabilities or things like that that come with Smile CDR on top of it.
Thank you. We've got one last on YouTube. How would you describe your compliance with the 21st Century Cures Act? Do you support bulk data export, smart on fire, OIDC, et cetera? Et cetera goes on a while.
I bet it does. Well, this is a fun question. We are, of course, paying very, very close attention to everything that's in the Cures Act. We've helped a number of organizations, as we spoke at the last webinar, bring their patient access APIs live. We're working with a number of organizations for things like the Peer-to-Peer Data Exchange that featured previously. We're looking at future rules that are going to come after that as well. I guess I'll say, today I certainly can't say that we've got the finished, complete, and ready to go solution for every single thing that's specified in the Cures Act. That I think would be impossible for anyone to claim, given that a lot of the even the concepts are still sort of being worked on in terms of how they're actually going to materialize. But certainly, of all of the building blocks that you mentioned, of course, we do absolutely support Smart on Fire and OpenID Connect and bulk export. And as we mentioned, we're starting work probably on bulk import shortly. We're starting work on all kinds of other things. I guess I'll say it is our intent to be to allow any of our customers to support as much of the Cures Act specifications as they want. It's also our intent to play incredibly nicely in environments where people want to work with other FHIR solutions as a part of their technology mix. We, of course, are big fans of that as well, and really hate concepts of vendor lock-ins. So we love working with all of the other great companies that are working in this space as well.
Perfect. Thanks, James. And I'll add to that maybe that the changes that we've released back in August for additional CDA generation capabilities, the projects that we have on the go now for CDA import capabilities, there are parts of the Cures Act that mandate different parts of these. So that's led to the prioritization of those functions. So these regulations are hundreds of pages long. There's a lot in there. As clients bring us their priorities, then we work them into the roadmap. I've got another question here from Kuchi. So with so many different ways that Smile can be configured, how do you ensure that new releases and changes do not impact a client unintentionally when they upgrade?
Thank you. It is Ravi, incidentally. Thank you, Ravi, for that.
Sorry about that.
No, quite all right. I don't know, Ken, do you have any thoughts here? I'm happy to take it, but maybe you have thoughts here.
Yeah, no, it's tricky for sure, especially when you think about how different modules can interact. The approach we've taken to this is building up a set of smoke tests that we call them. So where we actually stand up instances of Smile with different configurations, and we are we lean towards configurations that we know are commonly used out there. So if there's like a Kafka with Mongo and channel import, we'll have a smoke test that tests that particular scenario. So that's the approach we've been taking, and automating that to the extent possible so that we can run through all of our releases go through the full smoke test.
Right.
So that's the approach we take. It obviously has limits and constraints. There are an infinite number of possible configurations. So we're guided by what are the common configurations our customers have out there.
Right. Yeah, one thing I'll add to Ken's response. I mean, the second to last slide in the release webinar, we were talking about, you know, a request for people to tell us about their configuration. You know, tell us how you're using the product, which is, I mean, I always feel a little bit weird asking that. You know, like it is. I mean, it feels a little bit invasive to ask. You know, tell us about your architecture and your own private set. You know, your own private deployment and all of that. But there is a good reason we do ask for this, and I guess I'll say we're not specifically asking Ravi to provide that information because we know full well exactly how his organization is using the product. But you know, it's really important to us just to get a sense of how people, you know, which modules are being used and how they're connected to other modules in the product and what are the workflows you're using. Like the better we understand people's configurations, the better we can design smoke tests to, you know, that are going to make sure that those configurations are adequately exercised and don't have regressions over time and that type of thing. And it's, I mean, it's all the more important that we do because it allows us to deprioritize things, you know, types of tests that we know are not, you know, are not going to bring value because they're not things people are doing. And of course, there's only so many hours in the day. Anything we can learn that we don't need to test means that we've got more time to do other testing for the things that we do know people are working on. So I think, I mean, in a way, that question kind of speaks to why we're trying to get more insight into specific configurations that are in use, because it really does help us to sort of make sure that we're testing appropriately and avoiding regressions and prioritizing, of course, as well.
Thanks, James. And I think that actually ties into this last question that I see here on YouTube. Do you publish best practices recommendations?
Oh man, I love it. Honestly, I'm going to say we don't yet really. We do have recommendations and we're always happy to share them. We're actually quite opinionated when push comes to shove in terms of what's the right way to do it. We have not yet reached a point. And this is, I mean, it's funny that this gets asked because this has been a pretty hot topic in the last while in terms of, I don't know, what we could be publishing around best practices and playbooks and that type of thing. Just to speak about our strategy a little bit, we are a group, an open source community, and a company who believes strongly in the power of documentation. I hope that permeates through anyone who's looked at either the Happyfire website or the Smile CDR website. We make documentation really prominent. It's to the point where we developed our own documentation platform. That was early in the days of Smile. We actually developed a docs platform before we developed the rest of the product because we wanted to make sure that we took a documentation first approach. We then brought that platform over to Happy and use it to build the HappyFire website as well. We really believe really strongly in having lots of good documentation. But of course, there's lots of types of documentation. There's the basic, how do I do things technically sort of documentation that I think we've done pretty well with. But things like, you know, what are the best practices? What are the right architectures for individual solutions? What are the playbooks for complicated problems? I mean, all of that stuff we're actively talking right now. How does that fit into our broader docs first approach and our ecosystem of documentation tools? Does it even belong in documentation, or is it something else? This is something we're thinking about a lot right now. And I mean, if I'm honest, we're arguing about a bunch right now as well. So it is more to come perhaps on that. But I mean, thank you for raising it. It is, I think it just confirms how important it is.
Thanks. And I don't see any more, and we're at 10:59.
Oh, great timing. I love it. Thank you, everyone, for all of the great questions. I always find it, it's so insightful seeing what people think are interesting. And with that, I guess we will say goodbye. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in a quarter. We'll see you in 3 months.